The Shift is brought to you by SE Healthcare. Welcome to The Shift. I'm Dr. Andrea Coyle. Shifties, welcome back to the next episode of the Shift podcast. This podcast is powerful. It shows courage. It shows the power of, and I hate to say this, nurses out there, because some of us don't like the word resilience, but this is true. I'm going to say perseverance. I'm not going to use the word resilience. I have two great leaders, two great friends of mine. With me is Dr. Janice Walker, Dr. Bob Dent. Welcome to the podcast, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks for having us. It's our pleasure.
It's my pleasure as well. You know, this really came, the idea for this podcast came from a conversation that Janice and I had, and we were talking about shifts, and Janice is very courageous and humble and shared a story with me. And we were like, oh my goodness, this is a story the Shifties have to hear. And for those of you who don't know, there was an article in the AONL Nurse Leader journal, and it talks about beyond the exit interview. 5 nurse executives got together and they talked about the hidden work of a transition. And 3 of those leaders couldn't be with us today. So Bob, do you want to shout out to those 3 leaders, and then we'll dive into some of the questions?
So thank you, Andrea. And it's great to be able to work with Janice on this particular article. We worked on that for a few months, but I also want to give a shout out to our other co-authors who also went through some of these transitions that were mentioned in that particular article, and that's Colt Edmondson, Pat Patton, and Marina Hildebrandt. And so those are the other 3. So there were 5 of us that gave vignettes of our stories of transition that happened within our careers.
Yes, so we're going to get started, and I think Shifties listening, take note, because there's a lot of lessons learned and a lot of courage displayed. So here we go. In the article, you talk about identity shock during executive transitions. What does that look like for nurse leaders, and why is it often underestimated? I don't know who wants to take that, but it looks like you do, Janice.
I would love to take that.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to take you back in time to March the 19th at 10 o'clock. And that's when the message of my transition was delivered to me. And so that's when my journey of resilience, snapback, transition really kicked off. And I remember a time, Andrea, where I thought, okay, what just happened? What just happened? And I have grown so much in the last 12 months to help people that it's happening to right now, as we are recording this podcast, and in future times when our listeners are listening to the podcast, someone is going through transition. So my date was March 19th at 10 o'clock. Within 7 days, I get a text from Bob Dent, who's been a friend for years, and I assume he's reaching out to check on me, that the word is hit the street. And in essence, that's what he was doing. But when he got on the phone, he shared with me it had happened to him the week before. Now, the power of transition with collegial, relationship-based teammates that it's happened to makes it even more powerful. So I would say to you that across the nation, it's not just nurse executives or nurse managers. It's any healthcare transition. I've landed in a beautiful place 12 months later, to the point that my C-suite team has read the article, my new family, my new work family. And even my boss, who is our CEO and a physician, said, Janice, this article needs to be shared internationally, nationally, for all leaders, because of the power of the work of the vignettes and the takeaway from the checklist that we'll go into a little bit more deeply. But that's my why of doing it, is to give back to people that it's happening to. The shift is happening to someone else right now.
That's right.
That's so true.
And Bob, I'm just curious, identity shock. That's what really that that really kind of hit hard, identity shock, because at some point, and I believe in one of the vignettes it's mentioned imposter syndrome. And Bob, just describe what that feels like, the identity shock.
Well, yeah, as a leader, I want to appreciate Janice. My transition happened on March the 11th at 2 p.m. And I think many people who go through these transitions can remember that day, that time. And I think this year, and I sent a text to Janice last week or so, and I said I was reliving kind of that 24 hours before that time, what was happening. And if you really think about it, as a nurse and nurse leader for 37 years, and leading, organizations, to success, whatever that success might look like, and as a past president of the AONL, whenever that sort of transition happens in the way that it did, there is this identity shock that comes into play, and you begin to question and or there's a lot of opportunities then to really reflect. And I think for me that happened for several months, to really think through what is my value really to nursing leadership, and how do I rebound from some of this, and we write some of that into the article too about protecting your identity and the narrative and controlling that narrative in that work. And so, to separate that from an organization to, who you really are. And as a values-based leader, and you still have a lot to give to the profession. So now what am I going to do with that? But anyway, it is an identity shock. And I did go to AONL last year, Janice, we talked about that earlier. And that was an emotional moment. I remember, sitting in one of the corridors with my wife before going into a network meeting, and became pretty emotional at understanding what was happening in the moment. And those kinds of emotions are real, they're raw, and to have the support system. Janice mentions, me reaching out to her, but immediately after my transition, Cole Edmondson reached out to me. He called me, and he didn't call me just once. He called me multiple times over a period of time, just to check in. And so I think, having that network of colleagues who really care, and I think that's what we have in our nursing profession and with each other here is that caring aspect of it.
Bob, so well said. We're better together. Deb Zimmerman always says that we're better together. And I think having people reach out during these times is helpful, and it helps get through, I'm sure, some grief, some anger. It's going through the whole grieving process. It really is.
Right.
And you two can attest to that more than anyone. It is also mentioned in the article, ambiguous loss in leadership transitions. How does that show up emotionally and professionally for executives stepping away from their roles? And I think, Bob, you actually just kind of answered that when you mentioned at AONL, you became emotional, and y'all are still talking about the 12-month anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Let me say that too. We're recording this a week before AONL, and I'm going this time as a health system chief nurse. But I have a very close colleague that this happened to in the last 30 days. And I've encouraged him, do not go to AONL. In fact, if you find yourself grieving, as Bob and I did, that where's my work family? Where's my organization? We will embrace you to attend anything with us, because you're in a transition phase that this year he may not have an employer. He may be in transition, but next year he will have an employer. So it's just taking care of each other. This is real. It's usually a business decision, not a personal decision. And you just have to come out stronger to know. I had a couple of colleagues say to me, Janice, welcome to the normalized family of executives that have been transitioned, because you can put 100 of us in a room and it's over 50% that have gone through a transition. And then in terms of grieving the organization, it's talked about in the article, no one can take away from us the legacy we left behind in leadership. You're not defined by your organization's name. You are defined by the relationships and the legacies you've left behind. So you choose which one of those friendships that you stay the closest to, right? But you've picked up professional, collegial relationships that no one can take away from you. And so that helped me heal. And another point of clarity that I used is stop questioning why it happened, put a period, and continue to lead, which is probably the reason we all gathered and said, we must tell our story for the checklist power for the next one that needs it. Pat Patton reached out to me immediately. I had no idea it had happened to him years and years ago until he told his story.
Wow. You know what I was thinking about, and this isn't something that we had discussed about speaking about on the podcast, but I'm just curious, and this might be a whole nother article. When leaders transition, what about the followers, lack of a better word, but what about the people they're leading? What's that disruption look like? And we might not have an answer on this podcast, but when I read the article, because I've read the article about 4 times, and that's what I started thinking about. When a beloved leader is transitioned, what's the impact?
They start to question some loyalty. They start to question a lot. But as I've said to many, you're still called as a leader. You're still called as a clinician. You still have teammates to take care of. So always understand that healthcare is a business, decisions happen, but that doesn't mean that we're never going to chat again. And we're not, and with social media today, we can stay so connected, right? So that helped some of my discussions.
No, I think in the organization that that I transitioned from, I still maintain, and I was just on text message with a couple of the chief nurses within the organization just yesterday, and I continue to play racquetball with the chief clinical informatics officer for the organization on Fridays, and I've been invited back for different celebrations and things, and so the transition is hard. And to what Janice was talking about earlier, there are some of these that are business decisions, and it's not personal. I think, for me, and I think for many others, there is, because of that loss of identity, whenever you go through that transition, and it's not easy to swallow, and you're leaving a team abruptly in some of these cases, and so maintaining those relationships can be good, and I think to Janice's point, that legacy that you leave behind is important.
I love that, Janice, leaving the legacy behind. This is the other something else that I really loved. This one is one of the insights that is highlighted is the value of a pause. And I love this. In a culture that rewards speed, how can leaders intentionally slow down without feeling like they're falling behind?
I think that's it's an important one when you think about that pause, and how long is that pause, afterwards, and I think we put in the article to take a breath and really understand that, and what is that, the sabbatical or whatever you're going to take, to really identify, separate yourself from the title that you had and truly understand who you are as a nursing leader, and then create that space. And I think it was Brene Brown, whenever she in her book Rise Strong, and talking about getting punched in the face, and when you're punched in the face and you're on on the mat, just to be able to take that time to look at everything that's happening around you in this particular space, and then to rise up and rise strong. How much of that time do you need to be on the mat in that pause is going to be individualized to the person. Cole, in his part, understood he took about a year, to really reflect and to be able to truly, come back into what he really finds joyful and passionate about. For others, it may be something much less, and so it just depends on the person.
Yeah, I would say my pause and the purposefulness of my pause was twofold. It was a time to spend and pour into adult children. All my children are out of the nest and adulting pretty well, to spend purposeful time with them while I also balanced the job search. So, finding a full-time new home is a full-time job. And so I balanced some family time with job search time, and I felt good about it because I was, for the first time in my career since graduating nursing school, I had time for that. And then another blessing, I think about this often. I don't think this was coincidental. This is a true blessing. I got called 30 days after my transition to go do some interim work at the very first hospital I was ever a chief nurse at.
Mm.
So I got to walk back in time 24 years previously and pour into an assistant chief nurse to get her ready to do that job. And I had 2 children in that hospital. It's how important it was to me. It was my very first CNO job. Cole has done that a couple of times. He'll tell you where his very first CNO job was and how he got to go pour back into them. But without the time of a pause, I could have never done that for that ACNO. So what a blessing.
Wonderful. I just feel like we need to have more. We need to have a big room. I need to go Phil Donahue style, and I'm showing my age, and we can walk around and have these discussions. It's so powerful. But here's another question I have. What practical tools, like, and this is all mentioned in the article, what practical tools like alumni pathways, coaching, network activation can organizations implement today to help executives recover, re-enter, and thrive after a transition?
It's a great question, and I when I talk and coach with leaders, and we think about that sort of separation, and in there we talk about the humanitarian, exit strategies and some of those kinds of things, the practical tools that can happen with that. It's never easy to let a person go, regardless of what's happening. And so if you put yourself in the other person's shoe that is having to, with a business decision or whatever the decision is, how to have that conversation. And it's hard, for that person. So I think in the article, we outline some practical kinds of things, and that's, can be expanded on to create that sort of transition or pathway, for that can make it easier for everybody. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the way some transitions can be, that could be, hurtful or whatever the case may. It's all there's all of that's gonna happen regardless. But how do you create that strategy and that runway for them? So there are some things that can be done. Janice?
I think that's what drove us, Andrea and Bob, to write the article, because 12 months ago, Bob and I might not have had such a checklist. We were writing it in real life time, right, Bob?
Uh-huh.
And so we did our lit review before we wrote this article, and there's not a lot out there that is truly in a checklist format. So we spent the bulk of our time making sure that checklist could be used not only for someone that found themselves in transition, but as a reference tool to someone who was administering transition. That's how we're going to keep this work alive and ever present, because again, it is happening to someone while we're sitting in these chairs talking to the amazing Andrea. But the shift is occurring in someone's life. And so I would say that Rose Sherman was another name that I reached out to within 30 days. And as she listened, Rose knows everyone. She said to me, Janice, you have got to write your story. Find people. She gave me names. And Bob and Cole and all of us spent time really understanding who we were going to invite into this circle to write this story, because we could have had 50 people write this story. There's, yeah.
So do the five co-authors have next steps in mind? Is there a book coming? Is there, what's next? Because again, I mentioned I read this article 4 times, and I can relate to a transition when I got furloughed during the pandemic, and I had never been furloughed in my life, and I was devastated. And then I was supposed to be furloughed for 6 weeks. It was 6 months.
Uh-huh.
And luckily for me, I'm a little bit scrappy, and I found another job in a New York City suburb during the first wave of the pandemic, and it was life changing. But 6 months I was away from my home, and coming back, when I came back, I had a new office, a new parking place, I had a new boss. And
Mm-hmm.
I did not know how to make that transition. So I was relating some of my experience with the article, and I feel like there's a lot more work in this space that we really need to do for a lot of our colleagues.
I think there, all of that's really good. And I think, this particular article got picked up by Becker's Health in February, I believe. Janice helped facilitate some of that pickup. It's a good idea, as far as, what to do next with some of this work. And so here on the shift with Andrea, we'll get this message out to quite a few people who are diehard listeners to the shift, as I am, and love it. And there may be other opportunities.
Mm-hmm. As I was using my platform of my new position, which I'm so thankful for at University of Florida Health, as people were congratulating me, I also shared the article. You don't know if they know someone in need. So we're going to constantly keep this story fresh, because the challenge of shifting and transition is everywhere we turn.
Janice, that's a really good point. When I was reading the article, I thought to myself, what are the warning signs?
Sometimes there aren't any.
Exactly.
Sometimes there are. It's not about the warning sign. It's about the after.
Exactly. Anything, Bob, Janice, that I missed from the article that you feel like the shifties have to hear? I'm thinking of one, but I'm just curious. What are y'all thinking?
I have one I want to share that
I think
came
you're
from
going
a
to take
colleague.
mine, but I think you're going to take mine.
I had one that I said I have got to write that down, and it was during the job search, and it was looking at interim jobs. I'd never done an interim job, and as I'm talking to them, they say to me, and it just spoke to me so deeply. I included it in the article. All jobs we have done, if we were to take our resumes and start to look at every single one of them, every one of them are interim jobs. Some of them last 15 years, some of them last 15 months, but they don't define us by the organization. You're defined by your legacy. So take that away and remember, everything that we do as nurse leaders are interim positions.
Janice, that was mine.
I'm telling you, I tell everyone that wants to listen, all jobs are interim.
Yep. Well, you and I had talked about that. And again, I saw that in the article, and it's true. They are interim. Bob, curious on your end, and I just can't thank you enough for trusting me enough to emailing me as soon as your transition began. That really meant a lot to me. And I just remember those months after, and you and I stayed in touch, and now you're creating a new legacy, and it's so exciting to watch. What gave you that strength to say, I've got to move on, and I know I'm going to create this new legacy?
Yeah, that was in part of the pause, and it was the question once, once you get to that point, to to do something, because stepping back into this role, I get called immediately for the next 2 weeks on different positions in different states and things. And I really wanted to take that pause and really reflect on and talk to my colleagues. And I too had lunch with Rose Sherman and had a conversation with her as well, and many others. And really something that I've felt like, my 30-something years in nursing leadership and the work that I've done, is this an opportunity to do something really different? And that's where I leaned in heavily on my leadership firm and providing executive coaching, consulting, and speaking engagements around the country, around culture and around values-based leadership and mental health advocacy that you and I have talked about before on the shift a couple of times already. And so, right. So really to think through that and taking that time to reflect and currently, serving in an interim role, as Janice was talking about, she helped put me in touch with that. And so serving as an interim system chief nurse executive here. So I keep my finger on the pulse within organizations, across the country, and doing interviews with people and hearing a lot of the pebbles in their shoes and the mountains or the hills or the mountains they have to climb, and have a different perspective now that I'm on this side of that particular transition and my lived experience, and what I can do to be able to provide that level of support, the support that I received, in the hours to the days after, that sort of transition, but also helping people navigate their transitions as well. So it's been a true blessing, and I've learned a lot over the last year, more so than what I even anticipated, and it's been really good.
Bob, Janice, thank you. I have to tell you what I've learned as being on the periphery of your journey and reading your article and just really digesting a lot of it. It's what comes to mind for me is the power of listening. And I'll tell you what I mean by that is when I listen to your stories and I listen to the strength that you have exuded, and when I listen to the perseverance and now the excitement of creating the new legacy, it reaffirms why nursing leadership and all leadership is so important, and why we all have to just be authentic listeners. Because I can tell you, when I was furloughed, I told the same story over and over and over, and people listened and they kept listening. And I'm sure that you were in that situation where you just wanted to talk about it, and you had great colleagues and friends and family that just kept listening. That's a big takeaway for me for all of this work that you did in your article and that we're talking about today. So I just want to thank you both for that. Thank you so much for listening to Janice, to Bob, their shift. I'm excited to continue to watch them shift. And Shifties, remember, your shift makes the difference. Keep shifting. Enjoying the shift? Help us reach more nurse leaders by rating and reviewing us on your podcast app. It takes just a minute, but makes a big impact. Search for The Shift, tap those stars, and share what you love. Your feedback shapes our future episodes and helps others discover us. Remember, rate, review, and amplify the shift today.